covering like three main topics: why we do that, what are the specific initiatives we've been developing for the last 3 4 years since the pandemic, and basically how we do our work, right? Because um, I basically work in the research department, but Susana, she's the head of the tax policy department at the confederation level. So this is the kind of work that we develop with others, with others across the confederation, with people, advocacy advisors, policy advisors. We work a lot with our media and comms department. So basically, we're going to show you a little bit of what we've been doing when it comes to tax justice. So so first, can we go to next slide? So, and then the next one too. I mean, if you can press, yeah, that one. So basically, the first, why we work on fiscal justice, right? I mean, we at Oxfam, we are an organization that we feel that we need to fight inequality in order to defeat poverty. And why we work on different kinds of inequality. We work on the causes, we work on the consequences. But as you can see in this slide, is basically that we are really worried about how wealth is increasingly being concentrated among the few hands. So in this first, sorry, in the chart on the left, on your left hand side, you can see. Wait, because I cannot even read this so small. So basically, in that slide, what you can see is that basically between 1995 and 2021, basically, we consider all the wealth created during these almost 3 decades. The bottom 50% just capture 2% of that increase in wealth, whereas the top 1% basically captured 38% of that increase in wealth. We've seen this phenomenon intensifying in the context of the last 3 years, starting with the COVID-19 pandemics, but also follow up by the cost of living and inflation crisis because of the invasion of Russia, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and we are really worried about the austerity and debt crisis that is looming ahead, but also the climate crisis. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And this is not just an issue of wealth, but we are also having a look at what's going on with big corporations, right? Because we feel that in order to fight these different phases of inequality, fiscal justice has to play. We all know that, I mean, the current situation of inequality, I mean, the state, the public sector, I mean, we are worried about how, I mean, the first stage of inequality would be before the state comes in with taxation and with taxes and also social expenditure. But we are really worried in the line of work that we develop with Susana in terms of fiscal justice. We are really worried about how the fiscal system can basically decrease inequality. And as I said, it's not also an issue. It's not just an issue of wealth concentration, but also we are really worried about how big corporations they are basically increasing profits, but at the same time they've been decreasing the tax revenues they are paying on taxes. Actually, um, we could say that globalization, I mean, because of globalization, multinational corporations are the big winners, and the owners of these big corporations have been the big winners of globalization. We know that globalization has been able to take out a lot of people out of poverty, of extreme poverty. But what we know so far is that big corporations are basically accumulating more and more and more profits. And beyond the globalization, the digitalization of the economy, the globalization, but also the presence of tax havens, they pose like a critical challenge for the international rules that we have to somehow organize the global fiscal system. Additionally, what we've been able to see so far, because of this cost of living crisis, as I said, because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we also been following up what has happened. What are the main sources of this inflation? And it is an evidence that we have in many countries across the world that is basically corporate margins that are driving this cost of living crisis, right? Can we move on to the next one? So what's our diagnosis? Basically, is that tax systems worldwide and at the country level they are basically accomplices of this inequality situation, with the consequences that these high levels of inequality we are facing have in societies. I mean, if you were, I mean, if we consider the world as just one country, This world would have levels of inequality similar to those that we can see in a country like South Africa, that we all know that this is a very, very unequal country. And so the diagnosis we have when it comes to the fiscal system is that the revenues they are able to they are able to raise are not enough, and the issue that they are not progressive enough because we are not collecting taxes from those who have the most, who have the highest incomes and who have the higher levels of wealth. And in that chart on the right, you can see what's been the evolution of the tax income that is being accrued according to different taxes. And what we see in there is that there are basically no taxes at all when it comes to wealth. Taxation for the corporate income tax, as I said, taxation from the profits of corporations have diminished along the years. So this is basically our diagnosis, and then I'll let the microphone to Susana.
Thanks, Iñigo. Just apologies if I get distracted, but there is a vote starting at the United Nations in 30 minutes. We'll be talking a bit later, and there is already lots of requests and reaction. So one of the reasons for this low level in corporate income taxation is and also West tax revenues is because of the role of tax haven. So this chart is from a report, a very recent report by Gabriel Zuckman, which I recommend you very much to look at it. It's called Global Tax Avoidance 2024. It was published a month ago. And it's showing that the level of offshore wealth has been increasing over time, which is the blue line. But also something interesting is that at some point, global policy, there was a concerted global movement to increase also how to address this global offshore wealth by increasing transparency and increasing the level of exchange of information between countries. So what we had is that when there is a political will, some of some of those issues can be addressed, and the level of the impact in global policies is completely different. So there is still very high level of offshore wealth, but the level of untaxed offshore wealth is being reduced significantly. Next, this is not happening with corporate tax avoidance. So I know that most of the times we tend to think that most of tax avoidance, the use of tax havens, is very much linked to corruption or criminal activities. But in fact, most of the biggest size of tax avoidance, of the use of tax haven or illicit financial flows, it depends really very much more on tax avoidance, but by corporation mainly. So 65% of the total tax avoidance is related to the abuses by multinational corporations. Well, we have in mind much more often that is because of corruption of criminal activities. That's also a side that is important and has an impact. But the decision why Oxfam, the reason why Oxfam decided to focus on the corporate tax avoidance and the abuses of tax haven is because of the biggest size of the total revenues that are lost by tax havens. Next. So here again, another chart from this recent paper by Gabriel Zuckman. Iñigo was sharing the link to the paper, is the increase in the use of tax haven by corporations. So despite a massive and global agenda to try to find the ways to address this, in fact, corporations, they use their power to try to block the reform, and the level of they've been intensifying the use of tax havens to artificially shift their profits to those low tax jurisdictions instead of declaring their profits where they have the real activity. So it's incredibly higher and higher, and now we can say that probably 35% of total profits, corporate profits, are recorded in tax havens. So which is a third of global profits are by large multinationals are still declared in tax havens. Next. Here's a little bit similar. On the left, you have an older graph from Gabriel Zuckman. What is interesting here, and something we wanted to show also, is when we tend to think also that tax havens are only very small Caribbean islands or the Switzerland. What we have been proving also with experts and Oxfam work is that the major part of tax havens are European jurisdiction, Netherlands, Ireland, Luxembourg, but also some of the most aggressive jurisdictions like Singapore are playing a big role in shifting this in shifting those profits. And it's not only Oxfam or researchers who are saying that. On the right, you can find the research that was published by the IMF. So it's not the International Monetary Fund is not to be considered as a very activist organization. They released a paper and a research some years ago where they were talking about the phantom investment. So their outcome was that about 40% of total foreign direct investment is channeled through tax havens. And among those tax havens, 10 jurisdictions are playing the biggest role. So again, we find some of those European tax havens, but we also find some of the most aggressive hubs like Bermuda, also British Virgin Islands, or Barbados. Next. So again, this role of tax haven, look, what is created is a totally artificial economy. So we have a Cayman Island, for example, who's attracting much more investment than countries like China or Brazil. So it's 7 times, small island with less than 60,000 people like Cayman Island is attracting 7 times more investment than Brazil or 3 times more investment than China. So this was a research we were by Oxfam some years ago based on the IMF database. So it's official information, but it's completely artificial to see the different scale of the real size of those countries and the level of the level of capital that is used, that is channeled through those jurisdictions, which is really reflecting that it's not a response to the real economy, but it's an artificial economy that is creating lots of distortions. Next. So despite of the work we've been doing, in fact, most of the impact, I mean, when the narrative and when the evidences on the tax avoidance and the use of tax havens has been more clear, is thanks to the investigative journalists, especially to the ICIJ, which is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And the ICIJ were the ones behind the Panama Papers, but also behind the LuxLeaks or the Paradise Papers, Pandora Papers more recently. What they show is exactly that we have some small countries, like some small jurisdictions, like the British Virgin Islands, that have 830,000 companies for a population of about 28,000 inhabitants, and a territory that it's 2,000 times smaller than Vietnam. So again, this is just to the picture, the asymmetry between the use of those jurisdictions for artificially shifting profits or diverting investment compared to the scale of the country and the real activity they can be playing. But it's very similar. The information we can have with countries like Luxembourg, Ireland, or the Netherlands. In one of the papers, we are talking about the Delaware. Delaware is the state number 1 in the US, in the United States, and Spanish large companies in IBEX. It's the jurisdiction that those Spanish companies use more frequently to have subsidiaries. So at some point we were saying that IBEX is the capital of Delaware, is the capital of IBEX because it's the one that is more frequently used. So this is something that sometimes never come to the top media, but it's thanks to those investigative journalists we've been able to change the narrative and make it more evident. So what we do is to work very closely with them, because they can expose the stories with confidential information. What we can do is work from those data and provide solutions that can help on how to build the new agenda at the global, at international level. Next. So just to explain this mismatch between corporate profits and tax haven. So yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we were looking at the report from Shell. So Shell is one of the top 10, one of the largest oil companies in the planet. And they were, for example, showing how they were recording still a high level of their profits in, I can't read, it's too small, in a country, in a jurisdiction like the Cayman Island, but in this jurisdiction, they only have 30 people and 0 taxes paid. So again, it's happening now. Some of those companies, and you will be talking later, that are scoring high record profits, are using tax havens, not for the real activity, but still to control some of the subsidiaries they are having abroad where they have the real operations. So what is happening is that the real operations are controlled from phantom or ghost subsidiaries in tax haven, where most of the profits are recorded, and they are paying basically 0 taxes in those jurisdictions. And again, from the data we can have from the official data in the US, but it's very similar to what is happening here in Spain, what we can see, some of those US companies are declaring more profits in tax havens like Luxembourg or Singapore, Cayman Island, much more than in countries like Brazil or Germany, where they have the real activities. And it's exactly the same when we're talking about the European tax haven. So it's happening in a scale, in an industrial scale, and it's happening it's coming the standard for most of those companies. So we need to change this way of behavior by large corporations. Next. So this was a very old investigation, one of the very first one produced by The Guardian, the British media. But it's easy to, we like to use this because it's very visual. They made a research on how the banana were exported from Ecuador to the supermarkets in the UK, because it was quite surprising to see how the banana producers in Ecuador were complaining because they were paid very little when exporting the banana. And at the same time, British consumers were complaining because the price of the banana was very high when they were buying it from supermarkets in the UK. So what was happening in between Ecuador and the UK in the stores to make the price jump so much? And in fact, this media, the finding of this investigative analysis from the Guardian is that, in fact, between the production in Ecuador and the sale in the UK, what we were finding is like a big number of jurisdictions that were not real operations, but they were increasing artificially the price. So they were using a distribution subsidiary in Bermuda. They were using a management company in Jersey, one of the jurisdiction that depends on the British government. They were the brand. The use of the brand was registered in Ireland. So in the middle of production and store and the selling, the real tangible activity, there were a number of activities that were just increasing artificially the price of the banana, but the banana was only being shipped directly from Ecuador to the UK supermarket. So it's an artificial business industry that has been replicated in many other sectors. Next. But probably what has accelerated is the increase in the use of intangibles in production. So what we see is that in the past, most of the price of the products were depending on tangible production. In fact, what we see is over the more recent times, the blue line is showing the value of intangibles in the final price of the products that are distributed in Europe or in other jurisdictions. So what we see is more and more the price. It's very difficult to understand what makes the value or the cost of a product when it's distributed, because it's not depending on the tangible cost of production, but it's more on intangible, like the brand, that the cost of selling, access to the market, and all those things are very difficult to be controlled. So for what is this a problem? Because revenue authorities, when you are a tax authority, like Agencia Tributaria in Spain or the IRS in the US, what you need is to be able to check the real price of products, to make sure that when you are taxing those products, when you are taxing the profits they are made, you have a real analysis or an understanding of how this markup is produced. When it's about intangibles, it's totally impossible to compare. How we can compare? I mean, if the cost when you're buying a Coca-Cola, for example, the price of a Coca-Cola, the brand is probably much more higher than the cost of the water and the formula that you are using to produce that. But how you can value the brand? It's very difficult for the revenue authority to understand how to tax companies that depend more and more on intangibles, on things that are not comparable at all. How do you see the value of Google as a mark, not only as a product, but as a mark, as a brand? So it's very complicated, and it's becoming one of the problems for the revenue authorities next. And the other problem is that you have more and more in a digital economy where you don't need to be physically in the country where those products are distributed to be operating in the country. So what happens? This is an example from Google. Google has most of the of the users in countries like Spain or Italy. It's the blue lines. This is the number of users depending on the scale of the real scale of the country, the inhabitants, the population in the country. What you have in the red line is just the opposite. How big is the scale of the profit, of the revenues that this company is scoring in those countries? So you can see there is a total mismatch between the number of users and when those profits are recorded. So we have a revenue much bigger in countries like Ireland compared to the countries where you have bigger number of users, but very little profits or revenues recorded. So that means that company like Google is diverting, artificially shifting profits to a country like Ireland, where the revenue collection is the corporate income tax is much lower, and in fact, from Ireland is even shifted to Bermuda, and they're still paying almost nothing in Ireland. So one of the problems is that the digitalization of the economy has completely challenged the way 100 years of international tax system where you needed to be based in the country to be paying taxes. If Google doesn't exist for tax purposes in Spain, you cannot tax Google in Spain. It can be operated. I mean, all of you are using Google every day on your computer, but you cannot tax because for tax purposes, Google doesn't exist in Spain. So that has completely changed the dynamics in the international tax system. Next. Maybe more clear is the example of Uber. When you are using Uber, it's just an example, but when you're using Uber, you're paying with your credit card to the Uber driver. This Uber driver is getting the 100% of the pay of the cost of the service, but 75% of this cost is directly shifted to the subsidiary outside the country where you are, to the Netherlands. So that means, in fact, only 20%, 25% of what you're paying to the driver is staying in the country, and Uber doesn't exist. It's controlled. Every operation that is happening in Spain or in many other countries is not controlled from a subsidiary in Spain, it's controlled from a subsidiary outside the country. And again, that means for tax purposes, they are a total phantom. They don't exist. The revenue authority, Agencia Tributaria, cannot knock the door to Uber and ask them to be paying taxes because they simply don't exist for tax purposes. So we had a completely, it's a radical change in the business model, but it's also a radical change in the tax system. And business models have evolved much faster than how the international tax system has been able to evolve. Next. But in 2013, there was an attempt to rebuild this international tax system. So you need to understand that tax systems are controlled domestically. There is nothing like an international tax system, a legal tax system that is followed by that has to be implemented exactly by every country. What exists is a soft law, so a consensus by countries to adopt some standards together. And most of the time, those standards have been led by the OECD, which is a club of rich economies, because now they have 35 members, but mainly they are controlled by the rich northern economies. So the OECD was mandated by the G20 in 2013 to rethink the international tax system, but not only for OECD countries or G20 countries, but for all the countries. The problem is that most of those countries were not participating in decision making, in setting the model, the design, and it has taken a lot of time, almost a decade, to come to solutions that could be considered as the way to really address the profit shifting or the tax competition between countries, because that's another problem. Tax haven is putting pressure on other countries to lower the corporate income tax, and is creating what is called a race to the bottom. When you compare to a country like Ireland, where the corporate income tax is at 12.5%, then what you feel is that you need to lower your corporate income tax. So this is what is called a race to the bottom. Is putting pressure on countries to lower the corporate income tax. In Spain, we've lowered the corporate income tax from 35 to 25% in 10 years. It's happening every year. So the two solutions were an idea of the minimum tax, which is at 15%. So where companies were supposed to be paying 15% minimum tax in every country, and the idea of taxing corporation on their corporate profits all over the planet. And this is not working. Not working, not because of technical solution. It's a very sophisticated system, but it's not working because of political interest. The US is never going to implement that. If the US headquarters, most of the biggest company is not implementing it, it's not no point to follow on now. So that's the reason why we'll be talking about the next solution in now. Next, Iñigo.
Yeah. So basically, when we were working on that, we then basically the COVID pandemics came in with all the political decisions or the economic decisions that we had to take to keep us all home, and the impact that this had for the whole economy, the recession, so on and so forth. But at the same time, we were working on ways to improve the corporate income tax. And then what we were being able to see is that while millions of people had to stay at home, millions of people lost their jobs, we were able to see that some companies in specific sectors like the pharmaceutical sector, the retail sector, companies like Amazon or big pharma corporations, they were making a lot of money, right? So basically, we start looking at what was the unequal impact of the pandemics. We were able to see the social and economic consequences for the great majority, but also seeing, and you can see on the right hand side of this slide, some numbers around what were the amount of jobs lost, but at the same time, what were the amount of additional profits some companies all over the world were making, what we could do with those profits uh, in terms of like paying, I don't know, like the furlough schemes that we have in Spain, the ERTES, right? So we were basically comparing these two options, right? And so at the very beginning, we start raising this idea of like, why don't we set up a new win for profit tax and an excess profit tax? So to make sure, let's identify what would be these excess profits, these windfall profits that companies were having because of the a specific situation that we were living. We all had to stay at home, but most of us we could keep our jobs and then we could keep our income. So we were ordering things on Amazon, we were buying movies on Netflix and things like that. And so these companies were making a lot of money. We were com- uh, countries, they were paying a lot of money for all the vaccines that we received, so on and so forth. They were even paying a lot of money in advance. So basically, we start asking for a windfall profit tax. At the very beginning, they told us that we were crazy, but then the things moved on. Can we move to the next slide, please, Oscar? And so and during the pandemics, I mean, when we start raising this issue of this idea of setting up sort of like a windfall profit tax for certain sectors, for certain companies, etc., we were told that we were crazy, that was really like an old idea. I mean, it wasn't a new idea because we had like windfall profit tax during periods of war, so on and so forth. But then we we went through this, or we are still going through this cost of living crisis, the increase in the cost of living that we are suffering because of the increase in prices of of elementary services and goods like the energy, but also food, so on and so forth. And then we basically came back with this idea, and in here you have like this is an example of what has been implemented when it comes to the energy sector, right? So the idea that because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, they basically made increase the price of a specific the gas that we use to heat our houses, so on and so forth. So most of these companies they were creating super profits, and then we came back with this idea. We started raising concern, uh, portraying this different impact that this cost of living, that inflation was having across society. And so, can we go to the next slide? So, and it was basically adopted by the Council of the European Union. So it was basically setting up a sort of like a price limitation, a price cap for the energy production, but at the same time, um, advising European countries to set up a solidarity tax based on these win-for-profit taxes. And so this is basically to express the idea that at the very beginning, I mean, when we started with this idea of win-for-profit tax during the pandemics, we were told that we were crazy. But then 2 years later, it was basically the EU advising European countries go on and follow these sort of solutions to basically balance the different impact that inflation was having across different households. Could we go to next, please? And it wasn't just the European Union, but it was also, again, the International Monetary Fund, which is not the usual suspect of an organization that likes to promote corporate taxation. They even approach us and ask us what was our idea on that, and they start analyzing, and they basically came out with an idea of what could be a proper design for this sort of like a permanent excess, a permanent taxation on excess corporate profits. And so this is something that we now have in the table. They are even saying that this could be basically this excess profit tax could be a complement for the current uh, corporate income tax system that we have. That is basically, as we show you at the very beginning, we see that companies are making more profits, but at the same time they are paying less taxes. So it's just basically to show you an idea. That at the very beginning it was a crazy idea, but now it is, I would say that it is in the mainstream, right? And now it's being discussed across different fora, and hopefully we will be able. I mean, it's a long way, but hopefully we will be able to come out with a different taxation for corporations. Next, please. And so this is just an example of what we've been doing for the last 3 years, 4 years when it comes to tax justice. So basically, we were really worried, and you can see in the image of the left, we were really worried about the different impact that the COVID had across societies. Having a look at how big companies, corporations were. Some of them they were making a lot of money, but at the same time, uh, millions of people they were losing their jobs. So they had like a really really difficult future ahead. Then we were worried about the recession that this COVID-19 had on different countries, and what could be the what could a fair fiscal tax, fiscal justice system, the fiscal system could work out. It could help to basically confront this recession, and but also we have some long term ideas, some long projects that we have been working on, but that they are also related to taxation, which is basically climate change. And then you can see here, this is the front page of the Guardian. That was from last Monday, because I mean we published a report on how different people pollute. So basically showing how those at the top, when it comes to income and wealth, they are basically the ones that pollute more, and so they need to pursue some tax solutions when it comes to the different capacity people have, or the different the different capacity people have to pollute. Can we go next? And so, and now it comes the global context, right? So, because this is something that we like to follow, because this is basically our framework to set up what could be our strategy, right? What is the current debate? What are the challenges? And just let me stop by this. This is also like there's been a series of articles in the Financial Times, which is also a magazine that is not I mean, they are not really into like putting more taxes or so on and so forth. But this basically shows you the idea that where are the stakes now? Where are the discussions now, right? So because we have lots of like countries all around the world that because of the COVID and because of the cost of living crisis, I mean, we have huge deficits, we have huge levels of public debt, but at the same time, we have increasing needs. These increasing needs refer to, on one hand, refer to the need to uh, transition a neutral to a neutral climate economy. So basically, to stop polluting that much. But at the same time, we have other threats in the medium term, which refer basically to an aging population. But also, you have also heard about the basically rich countries deciding to increase their defense budgets and they need to basically increase spending. So basically, and this summarizes pretty well where the agenda it is right now. So big governments are back, but how are we going to pay for all that, right? So we are following the discussions, and there are lots of discussions going on around how to increase resources for the states to pay basically the debt we have accrued for the last 3 4 years, but also to be able to fund the forthcoming needs when it comes to green taxation, to an aging population, the increased budget costs in terms of defense, so on and so forth. And this is basically why this opens basically a window of opportunity to influence on the different spaces, the issues that are being discussed, and how we confront all these discussions. Next, please. And I think that one is yours, Susana.
Yeah. So when we at Oxfam try to think what we are going to do or what should be our priorities, what we try is to think to read the context. So Iñigo was saying the understanding of the role of the state and the context is completely different in most of countries, not everywhere, but in most of countries, and the public perception is also different. So we try to understand that, and we try to see where we have opportunities or what would be make the biggest impact. So what we try is very often is to anticipate. So we follow some of those political agenda at the OECD, at the G20, at the IMF, at the United Nations, but we also try to anticipate. We try to expose the problem, to bring solutions that were different in terms of because they are more innovative, or also because there are different alternatives or different possibilities that now have more chances to be implemented. So at this moment, what we are working is in three levels. One is still working on this agenda on corporate income taxation, which means, finalizing the discussion on how to address the challenges of taxation in a very digitalized economy, the role of tax havens, and at the same time, this sense of windfall. What happens? How to tax those corporations that have super profit, that have permanently excess profits, and at the same time, they have a strong market power, a monopolistic position. Then the other big agenda is on wealth taxation. And in most of countries, wealth is very undertaxed. In many countries, we don't have a net wealth tax. We have very low level of taxation on capital income. Absolutely, most of countries are taxing capital income much lower than labor income. So there is a bias towards capital compared to labor. And there is also still a big agenda on trying to address the competition on taxing wealth between countries, how to attract some countries the wealth, the capital, or even the lack of transparency that is still making some jurisdiction very attractive to hide money for the very wealthy. And the last one is the global tax architecture. So what we try to think is how we can have a short-term agenda where we have an input, and then the long-term agenda. So now wealth taxation, I have forgotten to mention. We are prioritizing two opportunities. This year, from 1st December, Brazil will be chair of the G20. So this is a new opportunity, and we are engaging with Brazil to open up, to put wealth taxation on the agenda. But we are also working at the European level on something that is called the European Citizens Initiative. So that means that we need to collect more than 1 million signatures from European citizens from at least 7 countries and if that happens, if we are successful and we manage to get 1 million signatures, then the European Commission will be forced to start action on wealth taxation. At this moment, there is no agenda on wealth taxation at the European level. It's blocked because the countries so far have not been willing to put that on the agenda. And the last point, as I was saying, is the new global architecture. So we can discuss for ages on the different agenda. If there is an asymmetric power around the table, then the outcome will be completely biased. It's going to be still unfair. What we've been saying very often is if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. So what is happening is that most of the time it's rich countries that have been trying to control and keep the control on the agenda of a standard international tax system through the OECD. They were protecting the decision making at the OECD where they were overrepresented. What we are now trying is that to bring this agenda, this discussion, to be at the United Nations, where we have a broader number of countries participating and also a fairer or more inclusive decision-making process. So this might sound very like an utopia, but in fact, today we are voting at the United Nations the possibility of having a UN tax convention in the future. So what we are voting today is a resolution presented by the African countries to shift a part of this discussion from the OECD to the United Nations. So we'll see, so the vote is starting in 2 minutes, in fact. So we will prepare the discussion. So at the UN, everything takes long. UN tax convention is just the possibility of having something, how could I explain that? It's like a World Trade Organization. It's a place where you will have all the discussion around tax, but under a more transparent and inclusive place. So that's we will be, the 3 levels of work we will be doing. And for that, what we do at Oxfam is working at the global level, at regional level, and also at national level. Next. So that's what I was saying. Today we are voting at the United Nations. Next. And this is something, I mean, you cannot see now, but if you go to the previous slide, but in fact, what you will see is something some of our colleagues have been doing is try to map what are the different countries' position. And you will see it's not technical, it's a political confrontation because most of the developing countries are voting in favor and most of rich countries are voting against. So what we see is that rich countries are trying to protect this control to keep the standard decision-making under the control, while developing countries are wanting to, are pushing for for multilateralism on tax issues, but a better multilateralism where they are better represented. So what do we do to make all this happen? Because it's quite a big agenda, it's quite challenging. What we have in front of us is big countries like the US, large companies. So we are small player, but we have a big agenda and we're still influential. So what we do is to work in 3 levels. We work on shifting the terms of the debate, is how the public understanding is changing around the perceptions about what is necessary to be changed. So what we try is not to work only on the problem, but working also on the solutions to show that the common sense, in a way, should be changing. The idea, for example, that it's time to tax wealth is changing now. For a long time, the perception was that if we don't tax the rich, they will reinvest more in society, they will create jobs and everything. This trickle-down economy, I mean, it's been demonstrated that it's not working. So what we do is to work on the terms of the debate to change the perception, the common sense around those ideas. We work then on generating new evidence. This is something, for example, Iñigo is doing most of the time. He has the responsibility of creating data, evidences, analysis that is supporting the way we are talking in public, the way we are addressing to some of countries, how we are exposing the aggressivity of some jurisdiction of some companies, or how important it is, what we could be doing if we were, for example, taxing wealth, all those issues. So we generate new evidences, and we try to generate that through new methodologies, through new approaches. So it's not just keeping the technical element, but trying also always to put in a way that is more sexy, in fact, when we try to make it more appealing. And the last point is we combine all that with a campaign and policy agenda. So we work on the public debate, we work on generating evidences, but that alone is not sufficient. What we try is to combine that, engaging with governments, convincing those governments, but also mobilizing the public opinion, citizenships all around the planet. So it's coming like from the two levels, from high media discussion, and at the same time, the perception from the citizens that are requesting more or better solutions. So we work all around the planet around that. You will have some examples here. The campaign we were pushing for, the Robin Hood tax campaign some years ago, and the Robin Hood tax campaign is a good example because, in fact, that's a sexy name for the Tobin tax. So instead of calling that the Tobin tax, we wanted to rename it in a way that everybody was understanding that by taxing those banks that were responsible for the financial crisis, you could reinvest better on citizens and social investment. So all around all our work is in combining those three elements. And then we publish reports, we work with others, we create campaigns. Next. Just some examples of what we do, because more often it's easier to understand what we do in terms of reports that we are launching. What we try is not to keep that as a report only, but combine this with this campaigning or this public debate. So, for example, on the top and in the left, what you find is an analysis we were doing. I think that was some years ago by a tool that was developed here in Spain that was called Politica. We were comparing all the different political parties on some policies, not only tax, but at that time we were also analyzing, of course, aid policies, social investment, many other things, climate, all the things, education. So that's part of it. We want to show that we put some commitment and we try to see how political parties are addressing those solutions. On the left, we have Sin Impuestos No Hay Paraíso. This was an action that we were having in Cartagena de Indias in July for the regional summit, the first regional summit in Latin America that was hosted by Colombia, and we were one of the organizations moving this agenda with the government of Colombia and inviting other governments. On the top, you see also one of the panels we've been organizing with one of our some of our key allies. So we are not alone. What we try is to be also supported by key and very well-known people who have the capacity to influence much more than us and the public debate. So we have a coalition that is called ICRIC, which is a platform when we have Nobel Prizes like Joseph Stiglitz. We have very well-known and recognized people, José Antonio Ocampo, who was a former minister of Colombia also. So with all of them, we work and we organize some public debates at key moments. That this one was in Washington, D.C. for the IMF and World Bank spring annual meetings a year ago. But the idea was to move on the agenda and to make the IMF commit also on supporting more progressive taxation. And the back is one of the actions we're doing this year in January for when we're launching our probably more famous paper, which is in January around Davos, where we were having like a very, very big banner in Calle Serrano on tax the rich. When the wealthies are not paying, it's the rest of us who are paying for it. And of course, we choose to put it in a very beach area in Madrid, not in because what we wanted is to create a conversation about how the wealthiest should be paying more. Next. Yeah, some of the round tables and everything. This is just another example. It's what we call a photo opportunity. We organize at the moment where the discussion on the European blacklist of tax haven was, we wanted to push for this discussion. We organize like a tax haven in Brussels in front of the European Parliament, and and we were attracting lots of media to be talking about that, not with a paper, but just with something that was funny, which is this photo opportunity, this idea of a fake tax haven in the middle of Brussels, just to attract the media interest. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for always this fascinating presentation and the work that you are doing that fits very well in what we are like addressing in this course. And I think it's very useful to see like the different dynamics, level, initiatives, and interactions that you have. I'm gonna give 3-4 minutes for the students to compile at least one question in one paper by pairs or in groups of 3. You have to write the names of the persons and one question for each group of 2 or 3. And I'll go back to you by picking some of the questions and for the remaining minutes that we have, which are like 15 or so. So you have 3 minutes or so. Write one question on a paper by writing also the names of the persons that are like raising this question. Just give me 2-3 minutes, okay? Okay, Iñigo, Susana, we need to move. There are like some pending questions that will be arriving in the next minutes, but let me take at least 2-3 questions to you that they have been like raising and preparing. I have to tell you that there are like some questions that have been like tackling the issue of the UN votation. What do you expect about the UN votation? Because it's such an interesting like moment, no, in which you are like kind of expecting what will happen, no, about like the UN votation. So if you want, we can start like with this particular like aspect, which is more like what Oxfam and you particularly are expecting from this, and then we move to some more like specific questions. Okay.
Susana, you go ahead, or okay. So it seems that Susana can make it. Can you hear us, Susana? Yeah. Well, you can hear. So what we are, and correct me if I'm wrong. What we are expecting. I mean, we don't know yet, because what we know is how we have approached this moment. We have basically um, gathered intel about what the position of the EU and the US might be ahead of this vote. And the intel that we have, it is basically that the US and the EU will vote against this convention. And so, I mean, ahead of today, we've been sending letters and pressing with other civil society organizations. We've been pressing the representatives of the US and the EU to clarify us what their position was ahead of this vote, and then asking them to be more ambitious and then accepting that this convention. I mean, in the past, discussion about whether this discussion should take place in the UN or in an organization like the OECD, which basically represents the richer countries, the wealthier countries, right? And so, given as explained that the solutions that they have come out from the OECD are basically insufficient, are not ambitious enough, and they are basically not really good for global South countries. We've been pressing the US and the EU to accept to move these conversations around how to improve the global fiscal system, to have these conversations in a bigger table with more lights and recorders, right? Because when it comes to the OECD, it seems that it's basically rich countries um, pushing for their own positions, which is basically the positions of the huge, bigger multinational corporations around the world. And so we are, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Susana, she also has, well, she has shared with me, we are following the discussions and the vote at the same time as we are talking to you.
So my expectation is that we'll have a vote on majority, but not on consensus. What does it mean? It means that at the UN, it means that we'll go to the next step and we'll keep working next year on framing, I mean, what are the terms of reference for discussing this new convention? And in 2025, the real discussion about how to pass the tax convention will happen. Interestingly for us, this discussion in 2025 will happen in Spain, because Spain will be hosting the Financing for Development big summit. So it's something that happens every 10 years, is where the big discussion on the development model will be happening. It's something in the frame organized by the UN, but hosted by one of the countries. Spain was offering to host this conference, and it has been accepted yesterday. So it's going to happen in 2 years' time. So what I expect, I mean, what happens, UN tax convention is like a constitution. So when you build a constitution on majority but not on consensus, obviously that creates lots of tensions in the future. So what we expect is that we'll have enough majority to go through the next step, and we'll need to build on what has taken the countries, rich economies, to be voting against. And what is this confrontation is probably because they don't want to drop everything that has been happening at the OECD level, where they have also more power, but where there is more technical expertise, and they are reluctant to move to the UN, where there is more legitimacy but less technical expertise. So what we will be doing probably next year is to find a way to expose that there is no confrontation between the UN against the OECD, and we'll probably need to invent, I still don't know how, but we'll need to work with experts on how this coordination between two bodies could be happening. But when you think two bodies, I mean, it's the same countries almost, but with a completely different mandate and with a completely different approach. It's like if you were having two different countries to be coordinating the same agenda. So it creates lots of tension. It's quite different, the dynamics. So I expect a positive vote by majority. I still want to be optimistic, but exposing this gap between rich economies and developing countries, and the need to work to develop this consensus in the future. So it's something that can be accepted by all the countries.
Thank you so much. We just have 5 minutes ahead. Then, as we did in previous years, I will send you all the questions that the students have raised for you to have and maybe address in one way or another. But let me raise you two very specific questions that somehow are compiled into different of these papers that I've just gone. One has to do with, if you can have just very brief and specific questions to these two set of concerns. One has to do with the role of certain states that maybe both in the EU, in the European Union, or someone is mentioning here the role of Brazil leading the G20, that maybe you have a kind of more complicity, and you can work a little bit closely because you share some sort or somehow part of your particular goals, and that maybe it's easier for you, or they play a specific role in this channel or in this strategy that you are playing. This is one. And the other thing, which different groups have raised, has to do with the role of private corporations in this regard, which are the resistances, the instrument that they use to somehow confront these particular strategies. But also, one of the groups mentioned to what extent the corporate social responsibility framework play a meaningful role for some of these companies to play a more kind of convenient, or I don't know how to say that, but an easy role for you for them to accept this issue. So these two aspects, just address them in 5 minutes and let us know some ideas.
So let me start with the G20, Iñigo, if you don't mind. So the best thing we do at Oxfam is to identify champions. Champions are countries, people, experts all over the planet who can be working close to us, or who can be willing to bring our agenda. So when the former Minister of Finance in Colombia was appointed, we worked a lot with him because he was a champion. He was close to us, and we could have this close contact. But it's the same with Brazil. But when you identify a champion, you need to give him, this country, a mission. You need to show that they can make history, they can play a role, they can change the dynamics. So what we have been doing is approaching Brazil from very different ways, from civil society, through experts like Stiglitz, Gabriel Zuckman, and others, trying to show that this is what Brazil should be doing to change history at this moment, and they have the chance to do that at the G20. In parallel, what we try is to work with other countries, with the US, with South Africa, because they will be the next G20 presidencies, and France, big country that can show support. So a country like Brazil cannot be scared about taking this leadership. But in the meantime, what we do is all the advocacy. So to make that happen, first we need to create the enthusiasm at Brazil level. Then we need to help them on identifying how to make it happen. And finally, we need to create the political pressure to change the terms of the debate, so they understand in front of their constituency that this is something positive they are doing, this leadership. So it's not just one action, it's a dynamic analysis at different moments, and that means engaging with many other allies. And on the role of the business, we do a lot of corporate, CSR, corporate social responsibility engagement. We do a lot of corporate engagement. Personally, I've been doing that at Oxfam also at some time. I do think that it's something we need to do, encourage companies to do better, because they can prove they can have a better impact. But I don't think this is going to happen without some tension. So what we need is it's two ways to put the pressure, showing that they have a positive message to pass on the society, on the communities where they are working, if they go through some positive behaviors. But it's much more. This without the tension of sanctions or the legislative reforms is not going to be enough. The positive, the willingness to do positive changes in some specific company is not having the same impact as changing legislation. But having some companies that are engaging on a voluntary basis on some of those changes is proving to the rest of companies and the business community that it is possible. So again, we try to work with some champions in the business to prove this can happen. It's not the end of the planet. It's not going to create a chaos in those companies. But just the voluntary basis is not going to be enough. It's positive to change the perception, but we still need to work on the mandatory changes, on the legislative reforms.
Thank you so much, Iñigo. You want to say something, or?
No, I was going to give the example of how, for example, a huge, big Spanish oil company basically approached us when we were, asking and demanding in different editorials, in different newspapers for a win-for-profit tax. Super well-known, big company, as I said. And they basically approached us because, they wanted to have a meeting with us because they wanted to know why the justification that we had for this win-for-profit tax and things like that. But it is a close relationship. It's because we have had a close relationship with them that they can send us an email and saying, "Hey guys, we've seen that you've been, pushing for this win-for-profit tax, and this might cause havoc in our company. So we would like to talk to you." So we talk to them, right? And this is how and we talk to the senior management of that company. The person in charge of the fiscal policy of that company, the person in charge of the finance of that company. But it is definitely something that we consider when Susana was telling you about how all the things that we were planning to do in the forthcoming year. We figured it out how companies they might react to that. We talk to our private sector colleagues to let them know what our plans are, and so they try to identify with what companies can be a champion, what companies basically can show a great stance against this position. So this is something that we include in our strategies. Champion allies, they can be countries or companies, and of course, other civil society organization, experts, as Susana was saying, influencers. We talk to journalists, but it is I would say it's an everyday work. We have really good relationship, for example, with journalists here in Spain. There are not so many journalists in Spain that they are following right now what is being decided at the UN, but they know that they can pick up the phone and give us a phone call, and we can let them know and put them up to speed on what they are being discussed, what are the implications, what Susana was telling you, right? What we think is going to happen, what could be the next steps, and this is something that we work in different ways with companies, with journals, with allies, with experts, with influencers. And this is something we include in our strategies and our influence in the strategies.
Yeah. So I'm sharing a couple of reports that have been produced by Oxfam with some allies. Some are roundtables with investors, and some is a document what was called Better Returns. It's not this one. I will share. So we try to have the exposure. We expose, for example, the number of subsidiaries in tax haven, and at the same time we produce document when we show. On bilateral engagement with some companies, how they could be improving their transparency, for example, on tax issues to make to have a better, more responsible behavior. So we try to do the two things at the same time, the two approaches, but it takes time.
Thank you so much. We know something about the UN votation so far, or
No,
not?
no. It's going to take. It's still ongoing. So I think in about 1 hour it's 195 countries. So it takes some time at the UN to vote. It's not very fun. The process is quite slow and quite boring and quite. But it's very interesting to see the dynamics. So I think we can share with you, Oscar, and you can share with all the
Definitely.
students. It's a
Thank
historical
you.
day, really.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work also. Thank you for all these years like participating in this course, and hope to see you soon to both of you. Okay. Thanks to
Good
both of
luck.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's leave it here. Next week, remember, it's 3 hours. Okay, you will receive the instructions about the next two sessions, which are on global commons. I will send you the information, Julie. See you next week.